Hello everyone, I'm your host MX2, and in this video we'll be going over the release log for HardOps 987_34. For this one, we'll be going over just some of the most important things that happened in this release, even though it was a large and eventful one. But for the most part, the features that you are hearing about are things that you've become used to as a standard of life, but we still want to just kind of do something to retroactively discuss them in terms of how they appeal to us today, and just making sure to see how they've held up to the test of time. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in and begin. So for this particular mesh, I have a component selected, and we see that over in the modifier panel we have a few dead modifiers. Basically, if we were to press Q and go under settings, under the option manage, we see that control and shift will do an option called wash, and by holding control shift and clicking manage, we see that we are able to remove these dead modifiers. That's simply all wash does. It just removes dead modifiers. Occasionally when making certain assets or characters, I like to go in the end panel, under view, and change the focal length to something like 120, which just gives me a much humbler perspective view, which just allows me to focus a little better when I'm working on things in a viewport. But we also wanted to have the add camera reflect that when it was used. So if we press Q and we were to choose add camera, we see that now add camera reflects the perspective that is set by the viewport. So if we look at the camera settings, we see that that's set to 120 millimeters, just like the camera. And if we scale our empty, now we're able to go forward and just play back our image sequence. But really, this is something that's very basic, but really something that was just a bit of a small oversight. I really hated setting the viewport to something like 120 and then having my camera come in at 35. So now that is done just automatically. Sometimes I can find myself being quite micro and needing a mesh to sit exactly on the floor, and for that reason, if you were to select everything, press Q and go under mesh tools and select to floor, the object will be placed precisely on the floor, of course with everything being offset exactly as it needs to in order to have it sit exactly on the floor. I'm a big fan of using Displace for its non-destructive mesh displacement capabilities. So if we were to go in and just click on Displace, we see that I'm able to push it on the Y. And if we go in and we control click it, we can displace it once more, and I'm able to press X and Y to change the axis. If I want to, I can hold Alt to bring up an axial gizmo where I can further choose what axis I am displacing it on, which is important because sometimes you want to visually specify it, even though it can get a little wonky depending on how the mesh is oriented versus how you're choosing to displace it visually. But in the event that you need to switch between your displace modifiers, you also have the ability to press spacebar, and that will allow you to choose which one you're actively adjusting, so that way you can perfect which one you're going to, and then jump between them where they're also labeled, and there we're able to basically perfect the placement of our displace modifiers just using spacebar, and also using a spacebar blender style pop-up, but just letting you know that the alt axial gizmo is a thing, and also you can change it with spacebar. So if you are to take a mesh in local mode and you press Q and use ever scroll, you are able to scroll through booleans. Previously this was something that was a bit of an issue, but just letting you know it isn't anymore. Now letting you know that if you're in local mode, you can do everything from scroll through all your modifiers to scrolling through all of your booleans, pressing A to keep them if you need to keep them additively, clicking to have them at the end of your operation. All of this from the comfort of local mode. Hello everyone, I'm your host MX2, and once again I am here for the release log for 987_35. So for this one, it's a pretty uneventful review, mainly pertaining to just a few usability concerns with Everscroll and just preparing the HOPS helper to be ready to use the geometry node modifier, which was becoming larger around this time. So let's dive in. The situation with Everscroll is even more simple than the scenario that we're setting up, but we'll press D in the Boxcutter helper, change our shape over to box, press W to jump over and begin cutting a wedge. And we'll just create a couple of quick cuts. And what I want to do is select this shape, and we'll just press Q, go into Everscroll, but we're just going to control click on the dots to bring back certain bowl shapes, and then just click to apply. So now we have bowl shapes brought back for this shape. And now what we want to do is look at bowl shapes for this shape. Normally, jumping into Everscroll will cause all of the booleans to become disabled, even the ones not pertaining to this shape. What the purpose of this update is that if you were to opt in to choosing to use the bool scroll method that is set to, let's see, additive instead of classic, basically additive will additively add booleans to the scene instead of removing them, which is the standardized system of how it behaves. So to demonstrate that in action, it's rather unentertaining, but we see that now I'm able to press A and add these to my selection, and then when I click to complete the operation, I now have my previous booleans just in case I need them in the event that I'm still adjusting them, but I'm also able to now adjust the ones that I've chosen to enable in this current operation. So really it's nothing to explain, but here I am explaining it. Whenever it comes to things like the modifier helper for HardOps, keeping congruent with the actual modifier panel of Blender requires additional changes on our part constantly. There's no problem with that, but just letting users know that when it comes to the radial array modifier or dealing with any sort of geometry node modifier, we also are able to display the options pertaining to that so users can actually deal with it on the fly. For example, most of the time I generally work in full screen, so when I want to press Control tilde and press on the buttons visually in order to make adjustments, and that's just a more interesting way to work instead of having to find a particular panel located after, usually I spend my time sitting in a render panel or somewhere more unique like the material panel, so having to go back to the material panel isn't always ideal. So for that reason I will press Control tilde in order to bring up the HOPS helper, and there I'm able to go in and make adjustments to whatever geometry node modifier or modifier in general that's loaded inside of the modifier panel. So whenever it comes to HardOps 987_36, this release was focused on adding a new radial array in the form of the GeoNode version, and also improving the Boolean helper to have selection options and have multi-selection improvements. So without further ado, let's jump in and begin. So for this particular piece, I wanted to extend some little teeth on it, so for that I used Boxcutter. We'll tap into edit mode where we are already in knife and box, and we're just going to look at it in top view and go over to this front view, and first of all be in orthographic, and we're just going to draw from view and just create a little shape like so, and we're just going to select both of these faces and just control click on curve extract to rip that out into a new face. So we'll just extrude that directly out on the Y axis. We want to make sure it's straight on the Y. Who knows? Sometimes these faces get a little wayward, especially when you're extracting them from a circle. And we just want to extrude that down. And from here, we're just doing a little bit of basic modeling just to shape it up. And with that, we have our piece. So now what I want to do is make this rotate around this piece. It doesn't really matter because this origin is already in the center, as we can see. So if I do a regular radial array, it'll work out anyways. But to show how the new radial array that you're able to opt into under radial array, I'm able to choose to go now from classic to nodes v2, which is the version we're going to use. And if we select both of these objects and we go under mesh tools and we shift click on radial array, we see that we are able to array object A around object B, and that's what we want to do. And I'm just going to roll the wheel. How many times, you ask? Well, I'm going to have to roll the wheel about 250 times. Just kidding. That might be a little much. We'll have to scale the object down for that. But I think last time I rolled it to 120. I have to roll it to something a little smaller because the scale is just a little bit higher. So maybe 85 this time. But just like that, we are able to quickly radial array this object. So Whenever it came to adding on the rest of it, it was just a matter of me pressing QOT and pressing spacebar, choosing cylinder, and then pressing 1, 2, 3 to go through the configurations for cylinder. And we'll just click and apply that, and that will do. So we'll press Control I to invert, and we just want to just extrude this down. Maybe something like so. And what we want to do from here is just double extrude that, and let's also make this the #1 mod, just so we don't have to deal with sharpening at all or creasing. But we are going to have to deal with auto smooth, so we'll just shift click sharpen, and that will just deal with the smoothing for us at this time. But now we see that, you know, we've quickly got in, took this piece off, radial array, got slightly distracted, sorry to say. I'm always distracted with modeling. I'll in this next section. When it comes to HardOps and dealing with booleans, one of the essential utilities to get used to is the boolean helper. It's located at Control-Shift-B. By pressing it, it will show you the booleans listed for an active object along with the fast and exact status, so you can just change it quickly on the fly. Now in HardOps, you're able to select multiple objects, and the hops boolean helper will demonstrate information for multiple objects. In addition to that, you're now able to enable booleans and also enable their selection at the same time and deselect them from this window at the same time. So if you're being very particular about the booleans that you're enabling and you need to also select them with the helper, you're now able to. So just like that, you're able to do all of that inside of the hops boolean / bevel helper, depending on which side you configure it for. So 987_37 was a force update caused by us to happen with the update of Blender 4.0 suddenly coming out. While 4.0 certainly held more surprises for us than just what we expected, the update was fairly minimal, but that doesn't mean that it was entirely uneventful. Whenever it comes to issues like scale-based issues with booleans, we certainly try our best to prevent users from running into them if it can be avoided. For this, we will SX scale the cube out. We'll press Alt-W to start Boxcutter, but I'll go in the behavior panel, and we're just going to turn off apply scale, which means that whenever I draw a shape and I shift it to live, this shape is still unscaled or unapplied on scale. And this means that whenever I choose to perform a radial array operation, things will get weird, but not anymore, because we fixed it where now you no longer will have to press S to apply the scale. Now whenever you use radial array, it just works. But previously, the shape would come out oblong and looking unique if the shape had unapplied scale. And then of course the target still has unapplied scale, but at least our shape was properly compensated by the radial array for its negative scale scenario, or unapplied scale scenario. Sorry, I said negative scale scenario. In this case, it's a unapplied scale scenario. Whenever it comes to HardOps 987_38, only one feature was added of importance, and that is just the quad sphere added to 2Shape 1.5. One of my favorite features. We just wanted to add a new shape to it. So without further ado, let's dive into it. It goes without saying that there are millions of ways to get a quad sphere, including basically pressing Q, going under Mesh Tools, and choosing to sphere cast. Sphere cast is the easiest way to turn a cube into a sphere in HardOps. However, in the event that you have something a little more complex, for example this selection, and we want to convert it to a sphere, we can press QOT, and by pressing spacebar we can use the spacebar menu to select quad sphere, and we can even press E to make it equalize. We can press A to adjust the scale where we roll the wheel, and then I believe we can also press S to adjust the scale. We can even roll the wheel to change what type. For example, I could jump between an icosphere, jump back over to a quad sphere, and we could still even press A to jump and scroll it to choose exactly how round we want it to be. In fact, I never noticed how hypnotizing it can be. And we can also choose to display the original being false, meaning that the original objects are no longer showing. So now if we wanted to continue with this as where we continued from this block in, this is where we'd start, just with the other objects now hidden. So the initial release of HardOps 988_1 was a small one. Really, this one was also a response to the big surprise that came with 4.0, and that was 4.1. And the surprise with 4.1 was the addition of the Auto Smooth modifier. The thing about Auto Smooth is it's added to everything. So this is a really old blend file, and we see that when I click the mesh, we see that an Auto Smooth modifier is present, even though it's a subdivision mesh. Not that, subdivision meshes don't need auto smooth, but I don't feel that sometimes they need them. If the geometry is perfect, then I don't need this. Here we have some old decals, and we see that they have it displaced, normal transfer, and then there's this auto smooth. What is it doing here? Maybe it's not exactly needed, but that is now Blender. In fact, I put a decal at the bottom here, and once I figure out how to select it, we will see that it also received an auto smooth modifier. So this is just what we came to expect with this particular version of Blender, and also Blender going forward. So this caused a bunch of sporadic updates that resulted in us basically stabilizing to get used to this new auto smooth world that we are now entering. So here we are in Blender 3.6.13, and I just wanted to show that Auto Smooth was handled a little bit differently here. So as a result, 3.6 is vintage. It's a version worth recalling, version worth remembering, and a version worth having on your computer at all times. We see that the modifiers didn't go so well here, especially the smooth by normal, because of issues with the Auto Smooth. So if we were to select a part, and we just shift click sharpen, we see that Auto Smooth is enabled. We could press Control tilde, and Auto Smooth is a toggle underneath sharpening and shading. We can just click on it here, and basically it will enable Auto Smooth. But also want to show that Auto Smooth is also the first option you see whenever you go into the Hops helper. So we can just select everything and just enable Auto Smooth. In fact, let us try that. And we'll go in here and just try to enable it for everything. And it appears that we may have to go a step further. But there were some reasons for the old Auto Smooth system to... In fact, I don't even remember how the Auto Smooth system used to be. Here we go. And we just want to right click, copy to selected, and now everything is basically set to Auto Smooth. And really that's as easy as it gets, except for this piece we see that it's beginning to get a little faceted. So let's shift click sharpen. Let's select this, shift click sharpen, and just a little shift click sharpen will ensure that the Auto Smooth parameters are set to something reasonable. We don't want any faceting. That's the whole purpose of us upresing the model. Let's do the same thing here. And it looks like everything will require this, but we're just getting in here, having a little bit of fun with Auto Smooth for the last time, or at least not the last time, but the last time Auto Smooth is in this iteration. It changed after 4.0, so 4.0 is really the last proper version in my opinion, before they start getting a little weird with the Auto Smooth. So even though there's smooth by angles present in the stack, it isn't actually available in the... Oh, I guess it is available in the right click. Let's right click and choose Shade Auto Smooth, Shade Flat, Shade Auto Smooth, Shade Flat. Let's look at the modifier stack while we do it. Shade Auto Smooth, Shade Flat, and nothing's really changing there. Let's get rid of that. Shade Auto Smooth, Shade Flat, and we're just jumping back and forth between this parameter being enabled and this parameter being disabled. Except it looks like they were still refining that in this particular version because it doesn't actually toggle this off yet. But in later versions, the Auto Smooth modifier will be added and removed on the fly as is required. But I'm just showing that retroactively we still work with 3.6.13 even though this is a very old version. So minimizing this, we are now into 4.2 alpha, and this is the most current version of Blender. Now I just want to let users know that in the event that you do not want to use Auto Smooth or have it be present, there is a toggle where basically you can enable or disable Auto Smooth from happening automatically on any mesh. So basically by disabling it, it means that if we were to add a cube and we just shift click sharpen, we see that we're able to add an Auto Smooth, But if we were to just hit it with S sharpen, we see that while it marked all the edges, it did not add the auto smooth, versus if we turn on auto smooth, now whenever we sharpen, it also will handle auto smooth just to stay in line with Blender. But that's, in a nutshell, the auto smooth situation when it comes to Blender and us at this time. Hello everyone, and here we are at HardOps 988_2. For this particular update, we tried to keep things small. We wanted to begin shrinking in our operations just to ensure that we were staying congruent with Blender and not going for things too ambitious while Blender is being rather unstable. So you might notice that from here things began getting a little less as far as what we're attempting to accomplish, because we feel that the majority of the tool is set in place, and really all we're doing now is refining and correcting things that have possibly been broken through time, because features are never added broken, of course, but they do get broken by time, and the more features that we add, the more that time seems to impact them. So the whole purpose of the study has been to demonstrate how features are impacted by time in the form of a release log, but it shows that we have been fairly impervious to time thanks to diligent work of the team, but work still continues with how to make it even more robust and last even longer. When it comes to Blender, I personally have a few curiosities that I follow personally. One is the exact solver and its greatness. I want it to become greater and greater, so I'm following the exact modifier very closely. The other one is text. Text is one of those strange things that I find myself needing to use more often than most. However, whenever it comes to using the Q menu to add thickness to it and then using it as a Boolean object, it never treated it completely as if it were a proper Boolean. You know, text is text, so if we press Q and we use difference, and then we press 1 to focus on the main collection, then we now see that basically text is moved. Of course, once a text turns into a Boolean object, we don't have the ability to go into edit mode and basically retype the font, but we do have the original font being in edit mode, or being over inside the cutters collection, where we can go in here and say, I should finish the name so I just don't leave that inappropriate, and we'll select these two, perform a difference, and we see that everything worked out successfully. In fact, let's Alt-V look at the wire and just see how the T was treated, and the T is being treated very nice in both cases. That's always my concern, is that letters like T and A will have issues because of the way that they are solved internally, and we see that it just worked without any issue. And basically that's all there is when it comes to discussing the text to Boolean update in this particular update. So whenever it comes to HardOps 988_3, it is a utility update, meaning that we update it just to ensure that everyone's version is functional in the most versions of Blender, and that most of the fixes applied were systematic and done to modules that really don't deserve any sort of spotlight. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes we're doing work that just isn't glorious, that just isn't worth even talking about, and this update was no exception. So for this one, we basically came to terms with Auto Smooth in 4.1 and began working towards making it work better and better for this version and previous versions, and from there we just continued on. So for this particular update, it was all about having additional support for curves and having curves work better with mirror. So here I've Shift A inserted a curved circle, and we'll go in edit mode, and I'm just going to press RZ45 just to rotate it 45, and we will right click and place one in the center. We'll get rid of these, we'll select everything, press V, turn it to vector, and now we've basically created a triangle out of that circle. So basically, if we were to move this cube over to the other side and we select the shape and press Alt X, previously whenever we tried to mirror, it would cause an issue. In fact, now it's no longer causing an issue, a very small thing. In fact, if you press Alt X and you mirror across the curve itself, you can also add a mirror. However, keep in mind that if you try to do something crazy like bisected modifier, which is currently unsupported with curves, it will just perform the operation. It won't dissect the curve and split it in half and perform the whole bisection maneuver. We will just skip that, because for curves it's a lot harder. You know, we're no curve machine, but we do now support the ability for users to use mirror with curves. So now we are at 988_4, which is the most current release in this very long release log video. And for this one, we added quite a few new features. We had come to terms with the changes made with AutoSmooth, and we began going back forward with executing plans and taking the tool forward. So for this one, there's quite a few things that I'm excited about because, as I mentioned previously, I'm a big fan of fonts and analyzing how text is handled with booleans. For this update, we got even more things to basically enhance text in Blender. And without further ado, let's go over them. Font scroller was something I was very excited about, and now let's demonstrate it in action. So I'm going to Shift A, we'll add in text, and what we'll do is RZ90 just to rotate it around to face us. We'll press Alt V to turn off wireframe, and let's change this to something like HardOps, just something safe, something easy to type. And basically now, if you press Q, you have an option called Font Scroll, and it will begin scrolling through the fonts in your system folder. In the event that you have specific fonts that you would like to scroll through, if we press Ctrl K and we go down to the Hops tab and we go over to Properties, we can see that there is a fonts folder where basically I've specified in my reference images that I have a fonts folder where I've been collecting fonts. So now whenever we go into Font Scroller, instead of it loading the system fonts, it will load my specific fonts. So if we press Q, we can go into Font Scroll, and I'm just rolling through it. Notice that as I roll the wheel, I'm rolling through the A's and now the B's. For this reason, I asked for a couple of additional features be added. For example, if we press S to shuffle, we now see that the letters are shuffled, or at least the list is shuffled. So we're now scrolling through a shuffled list. Even better is you can also press R, and R will basically jump you to a random font. So sometimes you're looking for the perfect font, and that font might take 10,000 rolls. So at those times, maybe you would want to make it random just so you can see fonts that you would normally never consider. But really, this feature has allowed me to really get in touch with my fonts and just finding out which fonts I want to use and don't want to use. And compared to our previous random operations, this one allows you to go forward, but also go backwards. So now I'm able to locate the specific font, except I actually scrolled away from my random font. So let's right click and let's jump in and see what that was. So I'm on Alero.tff. So we just want to just let users know that, even when you press S to shuffle your list, you still have the ability to retroactively go through the items in your list. You might lose the original one that you started with because you've shuffled your list, but you basically are watching me just go back and forth through a series of fonts just to demonstrate that maybe you scroll past a font and you realize, hey, I actually do want that font. Now you can just scroll back and you can just grab it because you did indeed want that particular font. So for this example, we'll press Shift A and we'll bring in a new text object. And let's just bring this out on the x-axis, RZ90, just so we have it facing us frontally. And we're just going to type in HardOps. And we'll press Q and Font Scroll, roll this through, maybe press F to get something a little more random. And that's a good, nice formal HardOps text. So we will just go ahead and extrude that to give it some depth. And let's just snap our cursor here, and we're just going to Shift A, add a cube. Even though there's a couple of ways we could have quickly put a shape there. Sometimes I like to default to the classic just to see how it's doing. In fact, let's delete it. Let's do it another way that Blender has now, and that is with Blender's own little box cutter. And now we have a shape encompassing it, and then we want to exit. Sometimes it's just fun to just see what's going on. And so with these two, we can now select them both, perform a difference. And even though we're on exact, let's change that to fast just to keep things fast in this performance. And let's press Alt V and look at the wireframe. So even though all the outside geometry is just popping everywhere, the inside geometry has been optimized via a second degenerative pass added to clean mesh that is run on these objects. So we'll just place a loop down the middle just to make it formally clean. And now you can see that whenever I perform this operation, that the mesh isn't as messy as it used to be. In fact, older versions, the text would just come out slightly disastrous, possibly doubles would be happening and areas wouldn't even be merged together, because in order to shade text nicely, you have to put possibly an auto smooth on it. But when you convert it over to being merged with the mesh, you can't have any of that edge split business. You need to have it auto smoothing. So now we'll just shift click sharpen just to give it a little bit of improved shading there. But basically, all in all, we are now improving text on the way in when it comes to Boolean operations. Originally, I was going to hide the selected object and demonstrate this particular feature on something more simple, but why not just go for the gold and demonstrate it on something more complex, so that way you can understand. So I will go in edit mode on this object, and I'm just going to select this entire loop, and I'm just going to control click curve extract to extract this into a curve, or extract this into a piece of geometry. If I go under operations and control click smart apply, then I'm able to convert it into a curve. So now we have this as a curve. I'm going to take this and the object into local mode for just a moment, just so I don't have to fight with selection. And we're just going to select both of them, curve modifier, and using the F9, we will just get the right one. One Day Blender's F9 will also indicate the axis in the F9, if it isn't already. Let's press Control T, 9-0, and now we are basically deforming this text to go along this object. But we see that the resolution of the object isn't going to necessarily work out. So how do we want to handle this? You know, me personally, I would actually convert it into a mesh and then use a little dice on it, because dice is just a classic. In fact, let's try that option. And this object is how to put it? This object is a mess. And what I mean by a mess is if we press Alt V and we look at the wireframe, this is what we're dealing with. So that's never going to deform the way that we want it to. So let us try a few options. One of my favorites is basically converting it to a mesh, going under operations and cleaning the mesh, which because of clean mesh having recent updates, it now cleans meshes even better. We'll press Alt W and we're just going to bring up a blue box. And we're just going to perform a cut through there, so we can basically dissolve these, but we want to perform a limited dissolve, so that way it doesn't sacrifice the form. And then we'll do the same thing here. And we see that certain levels of delete just won't work, so we have to do a full dissolve, or a limited dissolve. We'll grab these two, limited dissolve, limited dissolve. So now we have something like that. Of course, we could have automated that a lot faster, but we're just demonstrating the classic way that we do things. And what I want to do is tap back into object mode, and we're just going to bring up dice, press V to bring up the 2D version. And we're just rolling the wheel till we get just enough divisions to make this work out, while also kind of looking at what we're about to do. So now we have something a lot more finely diced. So now we can just press Q, go with curve modifier, and we'll use the F9 to find the right option once again, except our H is reversed. So let's Control T, 9-0, and we'll just flip that, and we see that that didn't work out either. So maybe it's SY -1, and then we can bring it back like so. Every now and then, text will require that you get creative with both its positioning and the curve, especially if you're not dealing with the origin of the curve itself. So let's Control T, 9-0, Control T, 9-0, do it again, and we are almost there. I mean, maybe we are there. It's just, it gets deformed when we see the hard on the other side. It's not so easy when it's on the other side. Just kidding. Trying to figure out a joke there without making an improper innuendo. And really also think the curve could deform this a lot better, because we see that this, you know, kind of gets a little faceted. So let's try adding resolution to the curve. It's not going to work, of course, because this type of curve is set in stone because it was converted from a mesh. But if we go inside adjust curve and we press W, we should be, or is it Q? We're able to adjust the curve type. In our case, we're pressing V because we're wanting to change it to, let's undo that, and then let's try it one more time. We'll adjust the curve and we'll press V to jump it to nerves. If we jump it too many types, we lose that smooth gold that we're going for, because at some point the curve tilt changes, which is what made it move. But really just want to demonstrate how you would take something like this text and make it actually conform to an object like this. Really, this is a basic object, but we want to conform in even more ways, even easier, you know, going forward. So this is just one of our many pursuits when it comes to HardOps, but having text deform and be able to be, you know, properly voxelized is just one of those things. Maybe you don't deal with text that much, but in my life, I deal with text a little bit more than usual. Anyone familiar with my channel and its content knows that I am no stranger to the beautiful forms that is laundry detergent bottles and its modeling structures. However, today we're talking about the threads. You might notice on this bottle I don't have any threads. That is because now in HardOps, if we tap in edit mode, we can press Q, go under operations, and there's an option called to thread, where if we roll the wheel, we're able to basically set up the threads to be however we want them, basically eliminating that modeling process altogether, which is just beautiful. Another thing worth noting is that this object that we're looking at has multiple vertex groups, but because of a bug with geometry nodes, or the way that this particular geometry node is set up, whenever we apply the mod, we see that it actually nukes all of the vertex groups. So this is a known issue that we aim to rectify in the future, but for now it is a known issue that we need to resolve. And then of course we have this modifier now becoming red because it no longer has the data for it to refer to when it comes to the vertex group. Normally I would use the first thing we talked about, which was wash, to basically remove this, but we see that this modifier isn't red. Even though this is red, the modifier isn't red. It's still valid because it's referring to a lattice that is still present. But if we remove that object, we see that the modifier becomes red, meaning that now if we press Q and we go under settings and we control shift click manage, we now are getting rid of that dead modifier. So just showing a little bit of how mash works, or how wash works, even at the very end of this release log. So I apologize for the lack of articulation in this outro, but it is 7:10 in the morning and I've been working on this since 5, but I just wanted to exit just saying a few words. My love for HardOps has never waned. I will always look at this product with the utmost pride and will always be optimistically looking forward to its future. There's not a single day that goes by where I don't wake up talking about how this tool can improve, be faster, work better, and be more informative when it comes to conveying information to users. I apologize for the lack of presence with my channel and the Hops Empire. I will definitely spend more time getting back to things. I apologize for that. I never wanted to let people think that I was disinterested or anything like that, but I was ending up in a cycle of negativity that was beginning to weigh on me heavily. So as a result, I did need to basically pull back and handle the administrative work of the tools of day-to-day tool maintenance and tool improvement, while also focusing on getting myself back to the nitty-gritty of what it takes to be a good modeler. Because modeling is, for one thing, is hand dexterity, but the other part is mental acuity and having almost a type of purity of mind to be able to just sit at a computer for such an extended period of time and ignore the pains of your body while modeling. So the pains that come with making modeling easier brings its own pains with making modeling easier, and those are things that we also want to expand on and attempt to resolve. So this final model you see showing up is something called the bot leg 2.0, which is just a topological example that I was using to just kind of demonstrate a new tool that we're coming out with called InSolve. It should be coming out probably around the time that you'll be seeing this video. If not, it'll be coming out within a couple of days of it. But basically, it is our topological goals expanded into its own toolkit, and I'm very excited for it. So while the model you're seeing isn't necessarily the greatest model ever, it does represent a new turning point for me in my own modeling, in where I'm going to try to come back and demonstrate a more sane form of modeling that can result in professional notoriety and progression in this field that we see that's slowly diminishing over time with the rise of AI and the trivialization of our own skills. But I do see an opportunity for us to get in one more time and just really solve this geometry in a way that solves it for all of time, and I want to create a tool that does that. So I am excited to be announcing it here, but I will be coming back with a special video on that. In fact, paused on my channel waiting to be made public is an 8-hour video of me just talking about the tool, but I felt that that might be a little dramatic, so I'm going to try to bring it down to 20-30 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, to just really pitch what the idea is, and then from there we'll be able to go forward. But if you're sitting here listening to this meandering rant of me at the end and wondering why I'm showcasing this robot foot and talking about topology, I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.